Okay, hello, good morning. Great to see you. Yeah, so this talk is going to be a little bit different and hopefully interesting for you. And I basically quite often deal with issues of legacy code, technical debt, things along these lines, right? So I've worked in this area for a long time. I've been involved in Agile since before we even called it Agile, which is kind of an interesting thing. But I spent a lot of time in my career working with legacy code, dealing with technical debt issues across many different companies. And what I'm going to talk about today is really the notion of value and how it manifests itself in software development and in companies. And it might seem like it's a bit of a stretch from technical debt and legacy code, but my journey has been seeing problems in technical systems and kind of realizing that the problem is not really the technology. It's basically that we need to find better ways of working. We need to be organized differently, all these different things. Everything is connected, and we should not be surprised that some of the things that we deal with in technical systems are side effects of other things that happen within organizations and markets. So we're going to dig into this today. And it's funny because I didn't plan to speak about this until a few months ago when something interesting happened within the industry. So everybody know McKinsey, a consulting company? Yeah, okay. So they wrote an article, and basically they said, yes, you can measure developer productivity, which is a very interesting thing to say, and also somewhat controversial, right? So what happened with this is many people got upset within our community, within Agile and Scrum, and there were two primary responses kind of merged together between Kent Beck and Gerdly Oras. Basically, they worked together on a set of articles to describe their objection to this point of view. And for those of you who have been involved in Scrum and Agile for a while, what they're saying should not be too much of a surprise. Essentially, we know that if we measure individuals, then we can have some bad side effects, okay, within an organization. You can end up having competition where you should have cooperation, for instance. And we also know that there's no one person that solves all the problems in an organization or writes all the code. Basically, when we develop software, we have many people with many different skills working together in teams to solve problems. So productivity comes not just from the individual, it comes from the team that they are embedded in. And also, productivity itself is not really a value. Now, I'm going to emphasize this because that's going to be the starting point for what we discussed today. What is value? It's interesting. We use the word value all over the place in Scrum and in software development in general. You know, there's a mathematical notion of value. There's a business notion of value. And, you know, I was thinking a while back, it's like, you know, what are the different ones we can dig into? And we'll talk about that in a second. But let's go back to what Gerdly and Kent were talking about when they had their objections to the developer productivity issue. They were saying that the typical well-running company does something like this when they're developing software. They discover something that something the customer has as a problem. Then they write some code in order to go and solve the problem and put the feature in production. And then the customers behave differently when they see that feature. And hopefully that goes and solves the problem for them. But essentially, we start to go and see that there hopefully is value produced by that change we did in software when it basically intersects or works with the customer. And you know, we should be getting more revenue, they should be happier, we should have less people feeling demoralized on our team and leaving, stuff like this. So we want all these good effects. If we wanted to consolidate this into just single words, we can describe it this way, that you basically make some effort and you produce some output. And then there should be some outcome from that output, something which basically happens. And then you should basically see impact, be able to measure impact for the things that have been done. And it's interesting about this because if you start talking about developer productivity, you're really talking about just this spot. Quite often people want to measure the output. You know, the old thing people would talk about is like, how many lines of code did you write? You know, this kind of thing. But there's all these other ways that people try to go and sort of figure out Who are the better developers? Who are not so good? These things. Or the people that basically need help, can we motivate them in particular ways, give them skills and training to move forward with things? So from our point of view, this idea of going and measuring developer productivity seems like it could be problematic for us. But let's get back to value again, okay? What is value, right? In the previous slides, we kind of figured that it's the thing that is produced. It is the thing which impacts the customer, makes them happy, allows them to do their work or have a better, fulfilling life. But there are all different dimensions of value, okay? The one thing that seems common is it must be seen, felt, and maybe measured. And it's interesting as well to notice that startups don't seem to have this developer productivity issue much, right? If you have a very small company, it's kind of like seeing developer productivity. It's like you know the people. You're working with them every day. You see what's happening. And if anything looks like it's falling apart, you're able to fix it early on. It's kind of funny that we don't really see these problems in a small company, in a very small startup. So I always like this thing of like, if you try to solve a problem, find a place where the problem doesn't exist and maybe start from there. So we're going to talk about that as we move forward with this a bit more. So the thing I kind of realized is that there is an interesting thing. If we want to look at the developer productivity thing and sort of figure out that people, they might be interested in a measure of how good developers are doing, the thing which makes it not apparent, not obvious, is this: distanced to realized value. How far are you from the point at which people are getting value from things? And I have a very large, expansive view of what distance is. There's social distance, kind of like I do some work and basically it gets passed to somebody else and passed to somebody else, where the person who needs things has to go through several other people to get to me as a developer to tell me what they need, right? There's also structural distance. It could be that the architecture of our product is such that we have a piece, maybe a microservice, that is facing the customer. And basically we need all this infrastructure to go and basically build up the things that are used by this thing that produces value. So everything here produces value, but the distance is large between maybe our work and the place where the value is realized by the customer. There's also temporal distance, or time distance, the distance between when somebody wants something and how soon we can deliver it, between when we need to go and get something from another team and when they can actually communicate with us about these things. So all these forms of distance are things that get in the way for us. We can even expand even further than this and talk about something that we'd call load, for instance. If you have like a microservice and basically you're using another one and it has like 5 or 6 or 7 other clients, your stuff may not be their priority, for instance. If you have a manager and they are in charge of 30 people rather than 5 or 6, you're not going to get as much attention necessarily because the load is greater. So we can actually almost create some mathematics to make an equation around this sort of thing. I'm not going to do that, but I just want to point out that this thing, distance to realized value, is an important thing. And we can think about this when we are designing the systems that we use to make things for people. So let's look at several different kinds of value here. These are not, all the different kinds of value that exist, but these are ones that we commonly deal with in organizations. There's the value to the customer. What does the customer want, and are we satisfying the customer? There's also the business. The business needs to go and basically have a certain round of revenue and position in the marketplace to maintain itself. There's also technical value. And for those of you who are working in the technical parts of the systems, you basically know something can be of very, very high value. If this thing breaks, other things might break, for instance. And we can also put value in what we do to raise the quality level, right? These are things we can do. There's also social and ethical value. How does our development impact the world? How does it impact our business? How does it impact the ultimate users and the society broadly? And these are all things that people, can value. And the last two are innovation learning. It seems like we know that we must learn continuously, we must innovate continuously, and we have to basically value a culture that does this sort of thing so that we can move forward and do good things, right? ROI is return on investment. This is something that people care about also. You can measure the return on investment, we hope, in order to go and understand that we are investing enough and we're getting something for it and we are doing the thing where all of our pieces fit together to go and basically build value, like a large arcing sense of value. So it's interesting then that we have all these types of value, but what do they have in common? Okay? It's kind of hard to see in the beginning, but one thing that's common is we would love to measure these things. We would love to have a score that will tell us how are we doing with the customer, right? And things like, how are we doing with the business? Is there a measure of our design quality in the technical systems? Can we basically know that we are doing the right things ethically and stuff like this? And it's funny about this because, some things might seem very difficult, like how do you measure innovation and learning? How do you put a number to this? It seems almost impossible, but there's always the desire to do this. And we have that desire because we want to know, are we getting better, right? Are we satisfying the people we need to satisfy? Are we doing the things that we need to do? There's another thing that's also common about these values. If we are lucky, they compound and synergize. Now, what do I mean by compound? Like compound interest, when you have money in the bank and you earn interest, then you have more money in the bank, and then you get bigger interest payments that kind of grow things. There are many things that grow like this in the world. Organisms grow like this, life forms. Companies can grow, and they grow in healthy ways often when they basically are able to facilitate their own growth and do things that basically facilitate their growth and their ability to survive, right? So that's compounding things, right? And there's also synergy, right? Sometimes you have values that appear like they basically don't align necessarily, and then you have to figure out how can you try to basically satisfy both these values at once. And it's a very difficult thing that, when we are doing Agile and Scrum, we are basically in charge of an area where we are able to go and sort of like talk about the values that happen with this, but quite often there are values that happen outside the team that you have to go and be aware of, and we're going to dig into this a bit more. So how do we deal with value? As I was saying, it would be nice to be able to measure it, right? And alignment is important. It's important to go and basically know that our goals align. One of the ways that things may not align, okay, is when you are doing things that you don't necessarily need or don't impact the customer. And sometimes we call this like over-engineering in a way. This happens. And I remember when I was much younger being a little bit guilty of this. I wanted to do the best system I could. And it was nice, but it was also like maybe not quite aligned with the customer as it needed to be. And I became a little bit more mature over time, I guess, right? And this happens often, that we want to basically be so good at the thing that we do, we don't really see how it connects to the ultimate value, and it's important to basically keep this in mind. So this is that alignment problem. And also, as I mentioned, having many different types of value, we have to basically trade off, and we hope that they work together in good ways. So what are the issues with this? There's something called Goodhart's law, and there's interference. And I'm going to talk about these two things in a second. Goodhart's law is this. It was basically something that was said by someone, a man named Goodhart. He said, when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure, okay? And you see this all over the place, not just in software development, but also in economics and all other fields. In the research, there's another term that they use for this, which is proxy failure. If you want to learn more, you can find papers about proxy failure. And it becomes things like we have a medication that we want to go and give to people, and it makes them better in one way, but then makes them worse in another. Can we basically say that the way the medication has worked in this one way is the thing which is going to give us the ultimate goal of a healthier person, right? In the same way, in software development, it's kind of like if you say we're going to incentivize people to do particular things, don't be surprised if you get that thing, but maybe other things suffer. So as a software developer, one of the things I noticed a long time ago is that we would tell people to keep their functions very small and short. And I remember visiting a team, and they asked me to look at the software and provide some feedback. And I did, and I noticed that all the functions were very small, very, very small. But the names of the functions did not match what they did very well. It was very strange to see this. And I was wondering about this because when this happens, it makes you wonder if the people writing the software even understand the thing that they are trying to do. But still, the system was working, so it was a mystery. But then I walked into one room, and I saw a sign that talked about the rules for the team. And one of the rules was that functions cannot be longer than 15 lines, okay? So they basically made this a goal, right? And people met the goal. They had the functions that are very small, but other things suffered in a way, right? It's also like the thing of going and saying, we can incentivize developers to basically write more lines of code, and you get more lines of code, and then other things suffer in various ways. So this is a thing that we have to be aware of whenever we are trying to measure things, that we basically measure, and the measurement sometimes becomes a target, and when it does, the measure is no longer accurate for us. It can also produce bad side effects, which we definitely do not want. Visually, I kind of look at it this way. It's like we have a particular target, and we basically go ahead and sort of end up someplace else. And it's kind of weird, you know. Interference is a bit different, and it's really just a common word for the thing I was mentioning a bit earlier, which is that you might have goals that interfere with each other. And what's interesting about this is that sometimes you don't see the problem in the place that you're looking. You will see the problem in some other part of the organization or some other part of the software, some other part of the team dynamics, all these different things. So it's important to go and see if we can find interference and move it away from what we are dealing with. So to kind of express this, I want to talk about 4 different domains. They are not really layers, but it's nice to have a nice diagram like this. But one of the things that's bad that can impede the way that value is produced is we can have friction in processes. So we are doing so much process bureaucracy, so much process complication, it is hard for us to deliver software. So has anybody ever seen this at all? Yeah, and the thing is, this is why we are here. Agile and Scrum are to basically eliminate process friction. Architectural blockers or impediments can happen. It could be that the way the software is designed is not the best way for what we need to do. And so those things are getting in our way, and that's something which can have side effects all the way through. It may be that we are not organized the way that we need to be organized in order to go and produce good software and value. And it could be that the teams may not have the skills that they need to go and actually reorient these things and produce value going forward. Now, if we look at what we've done across the industry for these things, as I mentioned, Agile and Scrum are about solving this problem, okay? And we also know how to deal with the team capability problem. We can basically learn more as a team, and we can hire people who know some things that we need to know and learn from them, right? These are things we can do. There are things we can do to increase the capability of the teams that we have, right? But we also have this one here, architectural blockers. And essentially, we just need to learn how to design better. And DDD, for instance, domain-driven design is a very useful thing in this context. And it's nice to see that it's kind of working in a nice synergistic way with Scrum these days. The other one is basically team and organization structure. And the thing I put here is like Conway's Law, right? Kind of pointing out that the structure might not be what you need, and you can do things like reteam and all these other things. But the thing is, it's kind of nice to basically put that in alignment with where your software is going to be, or basically go ahead and change the software to have the structure you want there, or change the team dynamics to have the structure in the software that you want. You want to go and have those things in alignment also. So we have ways of dealing with all these things, and that's good. But it's interesting to notice what goes wrong in each case. And I mentioned, that these are the things that happen when we are not able to solve process friction, for instance. Our software can become late. And maybe the team morale goes down because everybody knows that they are not able to go and deliver good software, that there are bugs, and they don't know how to fix it. And they also know it's not necessarily their fault, that there are other systems that are breaking down. And then for architecture, you could have lost market opportunities. If your architecture is not good enough to be able to go and create things in the market, you might lose that market to a competitor. And you might also introduce technical debt in your system because you are working around bad large level structure within the system. When your team and organization structure are not aligned for you, you can basically have burnout. People feel like they're overworked, and the software can become late also. Do you think burnout can happen also when we have process friction? Yes, of course. Team capabilities, lost market with this, and attrition, people leaving. I think, in a way, any one of these things that we listed as side effects could be an effect of any one of these other things going wrong also. So this points out how these domains interlock with each other in interesting ways. And it's important for us to know this. Sometimes the problem that we want to solve is not necessarily in the area that we need to. So the thing about it that's rough, though, is that often we are given a bit of a promise in a way. If you just solve process, everything else will be okay, for instance. If you just solve the skill issue, then everything else will be okay. And if you just fix the architecture, everything will be good. Maybe all the social problems in your organization will go away too. Not likely, but this is a possibility too, right? So it's interesting as well to notice that any one of these things, when we have a value, like we want to have a good architecture, we are often saying that the good architecture is our goal, and we hope that that goal will basically solve other problems and make us successful in the market, for instance. But we can look at those goals that we have as proxies. They are often not the end value for us, which is usually to survive and do well in the market and produce value for society. So it gets complicated, doesn't it, right? So let's go back to the notion of realized value that I mentioned before. It's an interesting thing to notice that for most all of these things that I described as problems, one way of handling them tends to sort of help a bit. It doesn't help by itself completely, but it is the thing that we try to go and sort of practice over and over again. At this conference, it's kind of like I saw the one value that we have here is no secret knowledge. But to me, it seems like there's this interesting thing of I don't think people quite know yet why it is that this way of solving the problem solves many problems, regardless of the type of problem. So what is that way? That way is to take big things and break them down into smaller pieces, right? And we often do this because of tensions that we feel in software development. How big should a team of people be? Should you have 200 people in a team? You could, right? Will that team be as fast and have as good culture and everything as a team of maybe 5 to 10 people? Probably not, right? There's a cost to communicating across people. And to keep that cost down, we have smaller groups of people. This doesn't mean you don't have large teams, but you know that there's a trade-off. As you increase the size of teams, you might need other process in order to make that work well, right? But we know that there is a sweet spot for size of teams. The other thing, too, is that there's a constraint that we call Dunbar's number, which is something that was discovered by Robin Dunbar, and he had a theory about this. It turns out that for any context that you're in, you can probably remember the names and faces of maybe about 100 people. And then beyond that, people just look very different to you, and you don't recognize them, and you don't feel like you are part of them. There's also the thing of the size of functions, the size of classes, the size of services. Once they get to a point, they're hard to understand by themselves. So we want to break them into pieces that are easy to understand. What about experimentation? Do you want big experiments that could go terribly wrong or small ones? We prefer the smaller ones, don't we? And what about delivering value? Do we want to basically have just one big release that makes everything happen for the customer and hope that we got it right? No, we want to deliver in small increments. So this is the thing that we try to do. We try to break things down smaller in time and in size and all these things in order to basically reduce the friction in what we are doing. And when we do this, we end up going and introducing a bit of a problem also. If I break down a large piece of software into many small pieces, the question becomes, how does each piece fit with the others in order to produce the value that we care about? If I break down an organization into many, many small teams, how do they fit together in order to produce the whole? And it's interesting with this because we have tried all different kinds of solutions in the industry and in business for this kind of thing. And it seems that the one thing that is interesting to notice is that you really want to go and be close to the customer now, no matter where you are, in order to basically reduce that distance to realized value, okay? And we can see that in teams and in products. If you have a product in the market and you have all these sub-pieces that you need to create, it might be hard for the people that are very far away to see the result of what they do. And it might be hard for people to value that piece, even though it's important. It's also a thing which basically is just one other piece in the value chain to producing the value. So we have to figure out how the pieces fit together. And the thing about this that's interesting, though, is that once we recognize this, that we can break things down, we might get very sad about this. We might get sad because we realize that we want to go and keep things small to make things work well, and we wish that that constraint did not exist. We hope for a way to go and have an organization of 10,000 people working on one product that makes a lot of money and delivers fast and all these things, right? But that's just not the way things work, right? In every system, when you scale, you introduce complication at times. There are ways to work around this, but the interesting thing, though, is sometimes you have to kind of recognize that this is a constraint that's there, and you basically can learn how to work with that constraint in order to produce value in different ways. Okay? So let's get back to value again. Okay? As I mentioned earlier, with many small things, we run into the problem of making things that do not directly create value, okay? They are pieces of the things that produce value for you. And this often happens in very mature products. People always want a new feature, and then you can make more revenue with that new feature. And you know that you can basically go ahead and have happier customers with more features and things like this, until you turn into Microsoft Excel, right? And it becomes a very big thing that is hard to change. And we know that these are problems across this. And we have this issue of distance to value. But it is interesting to notice that one thing that we are seeing more and more of in the industry is a recognition that you can do something different with this. One thing that you can do is just not make big products. But that's very hard to do. This is kind of like saying, I enjoy a good healthy lunch and dinner, but I'm only going to eat 500 calories a day and see if I can do this, right? It's kind of ridiculous. You're working against the natural tendency to eat enough to basically produce energy for your body, right? And this is the tough thing, is that keeping a product small is very difficult if you're successful, because then people want more features. They want to do more things. So there's a tension in doing this kind of thing. So one thing that is interesting that I mentioned before is you can try to make every team, as much as possible, customer-facing. Now, what does that mean in practice? It's funny because you probably have many things in your product that no customer is going to want by themselves, right? It's just something which is so specialized that you use it in your big product. So it doesn't make much sense that way. But there are different scales at which you can do this that can go and give you value in business, right? One thing that's interesting with this is what Amazon does, right? They basically are like a giant e-commerce company, And the thing that is very interesting about them is that they, very early on, discovered that they really needed cloud computing in order to do their work effectively. So the typical company, when they discover this, what they would do is they would say, okay, let's set up some teams to go and do this in-house. And it's going to feel terrible for us because we're going to put so much money into those teams. And maybe they're not the world's experts in that. We want to be the experts in e-commerce, not the experts in cloud computing, for instance. So this is a tension. And you'll often see older companies in this situation where they fund an internal thing that they could have bought, but they fund it internally and it ends up failing because it's hard to give it the attention that it needs. It competes with other investments. What Amazon did is they basically created AWS. And early on, as they were developing their cloud computing infrastructure, they said, what would this look like if it was a separate product by itself? And so when they did this, they said, we are going to sell this, okay? And we're going to harden this in the market. We're going to set things up so that basically this thing will have to succeed on its own as its own product. We will let customers give us information about what is good and important that makes this a well-rounded product, okay, that will work for the industry, and we make money off of it, but we can use it for our e-commerce business, right? So you see the difference here with this, right? We are reducing the distance to realized value by going and saying we will take a piece, we will make it valuable by itself, and basically make sure that it's something that can produce value. And so we will see this over and over again. Another example of this, which is interesting because it's across multiple companies, is Elon Musk with like SpaceX and SolarCity and Tesla. And it's interesting about that because what he seems to do, what their organization seems to do, is basically discover like, oh, for our cars, we need to have very good battery technology. Can we buy the batteries that we need? Maybe not, okay? So we wait? No, we basically discover we can make batteries. And if we start to make the batteries, if we start to basically do the thing to make them more efficient over time, then that will serve our cars, but we can also sell these as storage units in homes to do this, right? And there are all these other examples about doing this kind of thing. So it's an interesting thing about this is to recognize that this thing of breaking things down is good, but it's also like you have to look at each piece and say, what is the value of this thing independent of the thing it is serving right now? Can we basically maximize the value of this thing? And if we can, this can become a point of emphasis for our process and for our culture. This may sound different. Maybe you've seen some of this, and maybe you've thought of it, maybe you haven't. But we are all part of a grand experiment with this. What if we tried to maximize in Agile and Scrum? We try to maximize good quality delivery over time and cultures that produce this. In a way, the product is basically the culture that we produce that allows us to change direction when the market changes, allows us to go and have new possibilities and things like this. And this has been a massive investment that the industry has made in software development. And it's been a very powerful thing. But it's interesting to notice that this is a thing, many companies could have said, no, we don't care about software too much. It has to kind of work, but we don't care, that kind of thing. But those companies end up falling behind. So the value is really in the kind of things that we have done historically. And, it's interesting to go and sort of look at this in comparison to Simon Wardley. This is a Wardley map. And the interesting thing about these mappings and this mapping approach is that you produce a value chain. What are the things I need to go and produce the ultimate value, which is maybe customer satisfaction? And you look along the spectrum of things, and you think, okay, for the technology I'm using, is it something I have to make myself, or is it something that exists out there? If it's something I have to make myself, I have to invest a lot of money to do this. If it's been out there for a while, competition goes and drives down the cost of it, and it becomes something that we can just buy for a vendor. But the thing is, if we have somebody else produce this thing for us, we might lose a little bit of control over the things that we have, and we have to do the trade-off. Is the loss of control okay for us? Is that going to serve the values that we want to go and progressively form over time? So it's interesting with this. I think wordly mapping is nice. I think the thing that's interesting with this is to think about the pieces that you have that you're building up from. Can each of those produce value independently? Very useful question, okay? And looking at things from, and this is part of Simon Wardley's thing, is the commodity end of things. Can you be strategic enough to basically sort of make the new things that you need, but make them world-class also? And this is a gamble, a bet sometimes, but it's one that can pay off. But you have to recognize that you can do that, try to become world-class in this one thing or not. But it's kind of like, even if you don't recognize the trade-off, it is there. That is a choice that if you make it one way, you'll have one outcome. If you make it another, you might have a different outcome. Okay, so I'm going to move into something a little bit different with this too, thinking about capabilities within organizations. Okay, has anybody noticed this, that it's hard for organizations to do many things well? Yeah, it's very interesting. And there's always this call to basically sort of like have developers, I think, quite often do more with less in a way, right? And as part of a side effect of this thing breaking big things down into small things, we want to have cross-functional teams that are almost like their own little island in a way. They can do everything to serve themselves. DevOps has like self-service, and when you build this infrastructure, you can do these things without having to put in a ticket for somebody, for instance. If you have a problem, you can solve it locally. And this is good, but there's also a lot of tension in going and getting that kind of capability spread across the organization that way. And it becomes much more complicated when we have this issue of trying to target many different things at once. And particularly, sometimes the things that we have are in synergy, and sometimes they are not in synergy, and this can be a problem for us. It's interesting, if you can find something which is very synergistic, but it sits by itself, very synergistic, but it starts to fall out of synergy with the rest of the organization. These are usually places where you will go and spin off a company, for instance, and it becomes its own thing because it shares very little with the company that's producing it. As an example of synergy, one that I like to go and give examples is green hotels. If you go to a hotel, sometimes, at least in the US, I haven't noticed if a hotel room has this here, but there will often be a little sign saying, if you could please basically not ask for your towel to be washed every day, then basically you will be helping the environment. This is good, but also it saves them money too, to not have to wash all these things. So do we say then the company is greedy because they want to save money? No, this is a win-win. They want to save money, but if you're helping the environment too, that's wonderful. So these are things that are in perfect synergy. So it's important to try to find these synergies. Sometimes you find a synergy or something that looks like a synergy, and it isn't maybe a good synergy, or it has some internal contradiction. So I'll give you an example here, and this is something which many of you may have seen in your careers. If not, you will see it. Quite often, you have consulting companies that try to become product companies. Has this ever happened or seen this? Yeah, it kind of happens sometimes. You have a consulting company, and they recognize that they have like very good product people, they have very good designers, very good developers. They supply these services for other companies, and they think, look, we have all this talent. Why can't we make a product also? And they think about this, and they think, okay, this is a good thing to do. And it's a problem sometimes. There's a tension between these two things, because when you are investing, usually consulting, the margins are not very high, and so you need to basically have the people that you can put on the new client engagement as soon as possible. But then what happens to the product? Suddenly nothing's happening to the product until these people are off that consulting engagement and can work on it again. So it will always be the case that the product is going to have less investment in a way than the consulting services. But you can take a step back also And you can think, gee, what is the thing that is common between these things? Maybe if I'm able to hire very, very well, then I can use that hiring capability as something that kind of leads to the consulting stuff, but also I can basically make sure that the people that I'm hiring, they go into the product side also, and make the product side of the company be something totally independent from the consulting side, just because you've been able to find good talent. You can say that finding good talent is the core capability for building a good product company and a good services company. But you have to look at it that way. You have to kind of look at it as being a place where the initial synergy seems okay, but it's not okay. You have to sort of find the place where you can align values. Okay. So we can invest in the wrong things sometimes. You know, it's funny, Kent Beck, who was the founder of Extreme Programming, I wish I could find the reference, but I remember seeing him say someplace that when people do XP, sometimes the quality is too high, and I don't know what to do about that. And he has a good sense of humor, so it's like one of these things that you can look at this in many different ways. One way to look at this is that over-engineering is problematic, right? And we know this. And sometimes people will look at the extra quality work that we do and say that that's over-engineering, but we also know that most of the time it's going to give us good value because we build on top of the software that we build. And that is one of those compounding things that happens in process. So, you know, he was recognizing, I think the way I will interpret this is that it's sometimes you can basically do something that seems too much of an investment on something, and maybe you need to be investing someplace else. So I think this is the interesting thing, and this is maybe the thing to take away from all of this, is that sometimes the best thing you can do is, instead of thinking about satisfying the customer as being the main problem to solve, okay? And this has been the thing that we've tried to do with Agile and Scrum for a long time. Think about how do you basically build the value that satisfies the customers, but also enables you to build new and different kinds of value, right? And you have to think about the dependencies between these things in the organization. If I'm going to make something terribly complicated, should I be having somebody go and create that for me, and then they basically have the teams that know how to do this? Or should I try to do it myself and do the proper investment in order to be able to make that a capability of this organization? Okay? Can I basically find the right combination of things that produce big, big value and also create value in a market in other ways also? So this is a thing that it seems to be usually at the business and strategy level, but we don't think about this quite as much at our process level, because quite often we are very close to the design and manufacturing rather than these choices in a way. So as I mentioned earlier, we want to build cars, okay? So we build batteries, new business. What can batteries give us, right? It's this kind of thing of thinking about how can anything that you have be multi-purpose in a way? And basically, is there more value than it seems to be to serve the goal that we happen to have, right? So kind of ending up a little bit early, which is good because we'll have time for more questions. But these are the things I wanted to present to you to take away. And it's pretty much what I was saying earlier. Our view of Agile and Scrum often ends where product and strategy start, okay? And that's interesting, and it can be okay for us to do our own separate thing. But it's important to know that this is the kind of thing which is happening outside of our community sometimes, because then we won't be surprised by things. So it's almost like an informative thing. And the things that basically are being done at this higher level is some things that you can do sometimes when you make sense of the things that you're doing, when you try to go and design new processes and things like that. And this, the core understanding of this is understanding how value goes from place to place, understanding the tensions around the production of value, and then basically knowing that when you break things into smaller pieces, it solves some problems, but it introduces some other ones that you have to work on reducing the distance to realized value. Okay, so there's like this equation of going and doing these kinds of things and understanding that. But this thing of finding synergies and producing value ladders is extremely important. And I guess another thing that I want to go and add to this as well is that it's very interesting to notice that many of the practices and values that we have in software development are things that serve us very well, and it's very much the kind of thing that you heard about them from somebody who said, this is a better way to develop software. And then you try it and you discover, wow, this works. But some of these same techniques and ways of seeing things can happen in other domains. You know, I don't want to point back to Elon Musk too much, but it's amazing to go and kind of notice this thing that whenever he fires off a rocket and it crashes, some people say, ha ha, he can't make rockets. Look at all the crashes. And then people who have more information understand that the goal is not to go and get the first one into space. It's to basically do the thing that gets you along the way. And also, if there's a crash, learn from the crash in order to go and actually develop the better thing. And this is iterative agile process, but with hardware, right? I think Joe Justice is here, speaking. Great. Nice to meet you. Okay. And your presentations have been very helpful in kind of like centering on some of these things. But it is interesting to recognize that these things, they are not domain specific. It is not just software. It can be hardware as well. It can be just about anything. And in a way, it's a way of looking at the world. It's a way of looking at the potential for value in different things. And that's, to me, it's beautiful. So, any questions at all? Yes.
聞こえてますか？大丈夫ですね。どうぞ。
So, I'm probably going to go to many places with this, but
It's fine.
yeah, so one of the things that was the discussions that was going on Discord that I was really interested in is growth versus maturity, where like I think in a lot of ways we tend or people tend to expect growth from businesses, but I don't think that growth is the solution necessarily to every business that is in existence. Like it, not all businesses scale, and sometimes it's better to mature as a company rather than to grow in order to provide maximal value for the people that are at stake. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's just, I was just wondering about that.
No, it's a very good question. It's a very interesting thing because...
Hold on. I gotta interpret the question.
Get to this.
すいません。
Yeah.
質問です。プレゼンテーションの多くの部分に関連しているかもしれません。Discord であった議論について、成長と熟達度のどちらを取るかということです。すいません。会場の音声が聞こえなくなりました。ありがとうございます。ビジネスにおいては成長を期待するところがほとんどそこに偏っている気がしますけれども、すべての既存ビジネスを持っている事業者が成長すること、必ずしもソリューションではないと思っているんですね。熟達することが成長することよりも、そこらにいるステークホルダーたる人たちにとってもっと重要な場合があります。どうでしょうかというところで今、レスポンスがあったので伺いましょう。Please go ahead, Michael.
Sure, okay. One of the first Agile conferences I ever went to, it was interesting because you see all the participants and they become excited about a new way of working. And they go back and they try to show their team members that this is a great thing. And sometimes they encounter friction. And sometimes it's because they are working in a company which might be more mature and doesn't have a reason necessarily to basically be absolute great at software development because the market is mature also. And so the people who are in that company, it's like, I work to live and it's good. I like to go home, be with my family. Maybe I go out with my friends on Wednesday nights and this kind of thing. And the people who go to conferences are the people who get excited about these things. They like the new things, and they want to try these things. And it's very good that Agile is making something that is good for both groups, right? That it works that way. And it's interesting to notice as well that basically in the industry, people select where they work. If you take somebody from one of these mature industries and you drop them into a startup, they would just go crazy. They would quit, right? If you take a startup person and move them into a mature company, they would just be like, oh, I'm so bored, I want to go home. You know, it's kind of like, you know, I want to be able to go and do something exciting, but there's no excitement here. So companies have their life cycle, right? And there's that kind of thing. So it's just, it is true. We have to go and recognize that kind of thing. On the value thing.
Michael, I need to go that far.
Yes, yes, okay.
長くなるカンファレンスですね。はい。アジャイルのカンファレンス、初めて参加したうちの一つで感じたのは、参加している皆さんがね、ものすごくワクワクしてるんですね。新しいことを発見して、これで仕事のやり方も新しいことができるぞと、そして会社に持ち帰る、で同僚に見せる、会社のみんなに見せる、すると抵抗が起こる、摩擦が生じる、こういうことがあるんですね。それから熟達したレベルにいる企業は必ずしもですね、新しいことをやる必要がなく、ソフトウェア開発市場もかなり成熟しているという部分があるので、わざわざ新しいことをやらなくても回せるんですね。私は仕事は食べるために仕事に出かけていっているし、水曜日によりは遊びに出かけるし、まあそこそこ週末は楽しみたいと、そういうような人たちが一般に多い中、カンファレンスに出かけて新しいことを発見したい、そしてワクワクしたいという人たちがその中の何割かしかいないんですよね。ですからアジャイルはしかしながらそのようなワクワクタイプ、それから一般ピープルタイプ、両者に共鳴する部分があります。すいません、また会場が聞こえなくなりました。すいません、会場聞こえません。
I'll just add the one other piece then, is that okay?
Sorry, I stopped being able to hear the audience. They keep cutting it out, so it needs to be on so I can hear the room tone. すいません。
今音が出てないと思います。
聞こえます。
会場は音が出てないので聞こえてなくて大丈夫だと思います。
はい、最後までいきますね。ですからまあそういう成熟した熟達したレベルの会社に勤めている人がスタートアップに例えば行ったとしますね。そういう人たちは何がどうなっているのかさっぱりわからなくて多分狂ってしまいますよね。仕事できないと。逆にスタートアップの人たちが熟達したレベルの会社に移籍した場合、多分退屈でしょうがない。早く家に帰ってゲームしたいとか思っちゃうんですよ。まあそこを踏まえると会社にはそれぞれの会社にはライフサイクルがあって、それを踏まえた上で考えないといけないということですよね。I'm done.
Please continue.
I'll try to do a small piece, and then it'll be like this. The one thing I wanted to say about growth at any expense, right? We know that that's a problem. But quite often what will happen is you'll be in industries that just stabilize in a way where you don't see easy growth as much anymore. I was reading an article the other day about US-based airlines and how the way the regulation is structured, their margins for basically making money are so thin, they've actually turned themselves into banks in a way by giving away miles to their partners and selling miles to customers. And it's almost like there's an entire economy of miles and points around the airlines that basically they have found this completely different way to make money, and it's almost incidental that they carry people from place to place in airplanes, right? So it's a very strange and interesting world out there that quite often we will get these areas of stability just because of natural market forces and basically people choosing to invest in other things.
そうですね。成長を是が非でもということを進めていくのも問題があるというのは間違いないと思います。会社が安定的になってくるときには逆に簡単に成長できなくなってくるということも起こります。ちょうど先日記事を読んでたんですが、アメリカの航空会社の事業内容、この記事によればですね、非常にこのマージンがもういろいろな規制がアメリカ国内で存在するために、 マージンが非常に薄くなってしまってるんです。ビジネスの、営業の損益の部分でですね、マージンが非常に低い、小さい。結局、金融機関になってしまっている、航空会社なんです。どういう意味かというと、マイレージなんですね。マイル数、ポイント数というところが、副次的なビジネスになってしまっていて、ごめんなさい。I have to clear my throat. それで、これを売買してるんですよ。で、それが結局大きなビジネスになっている反面、本来、人を飛行機に乗せて運ぶところが二の次になってしまっているという、そういう結論だったんですね。そういう意味で様々な自然に生じてしまった市場の様々な、なんですかね、フォース、圧力とか、影響が、発生してしまって起こっている現象も検討しないといけないです。
Can I go on for a bit more? Sorry.
I guess it's choice.
Okay, so one thing I wanted to add on is that I don't think stability is necessarily sustainability, because even if you're stable, the world changes, so you have to adapt your strategies in order to survive in this changing world. And I think like Agile and Scrum are our ways as a software developer to embrace the change and to thrive in ever evolving landscape of business. And even though the value that we are delivering is stable, I don't think the method for delivering that value can necessarily stay stable, even if we wanted it to.
補足です。安定イコールサステナビリティではないと思っている件です。つまり、生き残っていくためには、企業であっても我々で、進めていっているソフトウェア事業者としても、アダプトしないといけない、対応していかないといけないということですね。そこで我々が、受け入れているアジャイル、スクラムこそですね、様々な変化が起こっている中、その変化を我々は歓迎することができるような仕組みになっているということですね。進化し続けなければならないビジネス環境に対応していくということです。一方、価値の提供は安定的にできるようになってきた一方で、その価値の提供をする手法についてはなかなか安定しない、どんどん変わっていくというように思っています。
すみません。非常にいい話なんですけど、もう少し短くお願いしたいです。他の方もいますので。
すみません。Yeah, it's just a request to cut it short. Sorry.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, I think you're right. Basically, the ways that we develop value, our work practices are going to change a lot over time. You know, we see a lot of disruption now because of possible AI tooling to go and make things faster and different. Our jobs will change. And what we see as Agile today will be as different in the future as it was when it was first incepted 20 years ago.
全くその通りですね。価値の提供の手法はどんどん変わっていくということは否めないです。特に今ですね、破壊的に進んでいるのは、より早く、より異なる手法として AI がツールとして入ってきているところです。今日のアジャイルは、未来のある日、全く影も形もない違うアジャイルになっていると思います。
Thank you.
では他にご質問があればマイクのところに立っていただければ、オンラインの方も声を発していただいて大丈夫なので。
Thank you for the great presentation. My question is regarding with the ladder. Yeah. I think that's the ladder for the value. Then the ladder is my question is ladder is unexpected or not. I mean, the ladder should find out. We discover the ladder, or maybe a explorer, or maybe that is some kind of a vision. We have to make some vision and making the ladder. I want to know the more detail of the ladder issue. Thank you.
素晴らしいプレゼンテーションありがとうございました。ラダーのところにちょっと私こだわりがありまして尋ねますけども、このラダーの価値でしょうかね、はしごのところです。それは期待されているものであるか、いないものであるかということに関して、または発見し得るものでしょうか、探索可能なものでしょうか、あるいはビジョンを通して我々が作り上げていくものなのでしょうか。もう少し教えてほしいんですが。
Okay, so yeah, that's a very good question about the ladder. It just seems to me, thinking about it conceptually, that having a rather large ladder is good, because then you have more opportunity for the things that you generate to be multi-use and produce more value, right? I think in some ways, many businesses have gotten themselves in a trap because they're doing just what the customer wants, as opposed to basically moving in direction that will go and present new opportunities, as well as satisfying existing companies. So that distance of the number of steps of the ladder gives you more to work with, I think.
良い質問ですね、ラダーについて。概念としては大きい方が良いかなということです。マルチユースの方がさまざまな価値を生み出していける、選択の幅が広がるというようなニュアンスだと思うんですね。今の企業において問題となっているのは、お客様の言われた通りだけに動くというちょっとした罠にはまってしまっているのではないかということです。やはり新たな機会を見出すためには、既存のお客様プラスアルファで考えていくということで、より選択の幅を広げておくということが必要。そうすると、ラダー、はしごの段数も増やし、また、一つの段の幅も広くしておくということではないでしょうか。
There we do this and rather step up and step by step, I think. It's an agile style. Is this right?
一段ずつ上がっていくというので、アジャイルスタイル、これで正しい見立てでしょうか。
Okay. It's funny because with Agile, quite often we do some very exploratory, emergent development, which is good. It helps us a lot. But I think with the latter, what I'm saying is it is useful to have goals. And you can basically use the potential to basically have the thing that you make serve the goal that is coming, as well as serve what you have now and make value as insurance in a way. Okay, so if it doesn't quite work, for the bigger thing, we can at least iterate it close in making money. It requires thinking ahead is the main thing, and having a plan that you might want to target. This is more than just the Agile, thing that we do day to day. A lot of this is about products and what you choose to make as a product, which has sorry.
Yeah, just a second. Just have to get this note down because it's pretty deep here. そうですね、アジャイルでは探査的あるいは後発的と呼ばれるような形で進めていくということはありますけれども、ここと少し別で目標を持ってですね、進めることが役に立つのではないかということです。つまり、今やるべきことはやっていくんですけども、同時に保険をかけるような形で、それと同時に価値を生むものが並行して進められないかと。で、今やらなくちゃいけないことがうまくできなかった場合は、反復的にアジャイルで、調整かけていって完成していく。と同時にその、別個ですね、その大きいやらないといけないことと 別に小さいシーズンみたいなものが保険として並行してやっていければですね、いいのではないかと。つまり先を見越して考えをしておくということです。日常的にアジャイルだけにガンガンやらない。何をプロダクトに今後していくかということも考えながら、将来を考えながらという意味です。
Thank you very much.
はい、ありがとうございます。次の質問の方、ご準備いただければと思います。Next question. オンラインの方でも大丈夫です。OK、ちょっと私の方からじゃあ1件質問させて、ください。Discord のテキストチャットで盛り上がっていたことの一つが、ベンチャーキャピタルみたいなところを、VC ですね、アメリカでもたくさんある、スタートアップにお金入れているところたくさんあると思うんですが、そうしたところと付き合っていると、やっぱり会社を拡大したい、成長したいっていうプレッシャーがすごくかかって、人数を増やして、で、メトリックスを頑張って追って、っていうことに、アクセクしてしまって、価値を置き去りにしてしまう会社はやっぱり起きやすいのかなというふうに思います。で、マイケルさんは、アメリカのスタートアップとか見てて、その価値を置いて、数を追ってしまうところに関して、どういうふうに見ておられますか？それの解決策ってはね、それから離れる方法ってどんなことだと思いますか
？So, there was a texting forum in Discord that was getting kind of animated about the venture capital scene in the US, where, there's lots of venture capital companies putting money into startups, right? And thereby the expansion and grow the company is kind of a mandate. And so you staff up, and then the metrics come along, because you got to track the startup, making sure it's performing and growing the way it needs to in order to get the payback. And somewhere along the way, value gets left behind in the dustbin. Michael, looking at startups yourself, and where you see the numbers and the tracking being put before value in those instances, how do you think people can get back on track? What needs to be done in those situations?
It is such a very large question, right? And I think, there have been indicators that this is where we would be for some years now. But it is interesting to notice how much we have tuned software development based upon a model of always having investment money to carry forward and seek new customers, right? So we are dealing with this new reality in a sense, and I think people are going to do what I mentioned a little bit earlier and be much more deliberate about what it is that they make. And we need to be prepared for that kind of recognition. This does not mean that we basically throw away the incremental approach that we use for developing things. But I think people are going to be much more careful about the targets that they have. As far as what this means for startups, I'm not really sure. I know we were always going to have startups, but I think it's going to be less startup trying to find a market than startup trying to solve a problem.
Sorry, just to confirm, Michael, so it's to flip it, your last statement is that there's going to be more startups focused on solving a problem than looking for a market?
Yeah.
Thanks. はい、すいません、ちょっと確認でした。川口さんの多大な課題にまつわる質問ありがとうございます。しかしながら、もう何年も前から今日がやってくることが分かってたんですよね。ソフトウェアの開発において常に開発のために、そしてお客様を開拓するためにベンチャーキャピタルのお金が備わっていたということを我々はちょっとおごりをしてしまったということです。今後はもっと意識してものを作っていかなければならないということを認める時代になっています。 もちろんインクリメンタルな開発をやめるということではありませんが、目標にもっと配慮、沿っていかなければならなくなるというのは間違いないと思います。そういう意味でスタートアップ事業は今後、市場を見つけてそこに当ててやっていくということはどんどんなくなっていって、逆に課題を解決するという事業がどんどん伸びていくというふうに思います。
ありがとうございます。まさにその通りだと思います。ありがとうございます。じゃあ、次の質問、他の方、ぜひどうぞ。
Thank you, Michael. I wholeheartedly agree with your description there.
You're welcome. Thanks.
Next question is pending.
Apparently, there's one person that wants to ask a question, but they can't find a microphone.
あ
オンラインからいいでしょうか。
はい、どうぞ。
はい。チャット欄にも、質問を書かせていただいたんですけれども、すみません。日本語で失礼します。翻訳を入れてください。
はい。
私の会社、コニカミノルタという会社に所属してるんですけれども、私の会社の中でも今回のその価値であるとか、あと価値の創造であるとか、あと価値検証といった言葉が、よく、最近上がってきています。ただ、その価値っていう言葉はつまり何なのかっていうことについて、社内でも、うまく説明できる人がちょっとあまりまだいないんじゃないかなって感じているところがあります。私自身ももしかしたらそうなのかもしれません。で、今回お話しいただいた中での冒頭にあったアウトカムであるとか、インパクト、そういったところが価値の一つになってくるのではないかなとは思ってはいるんですけれども、価値というものはつまり何なのかというところ、こちらを、ミシェルさんからぜひ、お聞かせいただけたら嬉しいなと思っております。よろしく、すみません、マイケルさんからお伺いさせていただけたら嬉しいなと思っています。よろしくお願いします。
Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to present the question online and I asked for the interpreting. Put the question actually in the chat online Zoom, but here it is. I belong to a company called Konica Minolta, and we talk about value creation and value validation quite a bit in our company right now. But fundamentally, what is value? Nobody seems to be able to come up with the proper explanation in my company. Even myself, I may not be able to define it. I was looking at that slide in your presentation. I think it was earlier in your talk where you had, I think, outcome and impact. And I was thinking maybe those are terms that are associated with the definition of value that is germane here. Michael, would you be kind enough to dive deeper in terms of the definition of value for us?
It seems like a very difficult thing to define, and I've thought about this a lot. I think the interesting thing about value is that there's always a subject involved. There's the person who has the values, or the group of people who have the values. I remember hearing someone talk about how you have grains of sand and these don't have much value until you choose to make silicon chips out of them because they have the utility that people might need for things. And I think that is like the base level of base level in this. It's people's wants and needs and how much they want the thing, how much they give reverence, I think, to the thing that they want to achieve or have or produce. But I'm pretty sure I will not be the person who will come up with the best definition of value. But I think there's something behind these words.
非常に定義が困難なんですね、価値の定義は。一応私の理解している限りで申し上げると、主体がまずあって、それは人、あるいは人の集まり、グループであるんですね。そこから発生していくこと。そこで一つの一例として砂粒を、取り上げます。砂粒は酸化ケイ素ですよね。ここからシリコンチップができる原料があるんです。砂粒の有用性を意識すれば、シリコンチップが出来上がっていきます。つまり、基礎的なところは、ニーズ、要求、欲求なんですよ。どの程度欲しいのか。その達成する熱意、 作る熱意につながってきます。絶対いるかどうかなんですよね。そういうことが、私がもちろん最も適切にこの価値の定義をできる人間とは思いませんけれども、そこかかってくると思います。
ありがとうございます。Thank you.
はい、ありがとうございます。また、会場からご質問したい方がいらっしゃるということなので、マイクの前までお願いします。
どこに立てばいいんだろう。これでいいですかね。先ほど、今後の、スタートアップは、市場を拡大するよりも課題を見つけて解決するみたいなお話を質問の中でしていただいたと思うんですけど、実際にはその課題を解決する上でも、市場の中で、その課題があるっていうことを認知してもらって、市場を拡大しながら解決していく。スケールする必要がある。要するに、VC さんから、投資を受けるためにはある程度リターンが得られるっていう中で、なんですかね、スケールする可能性と、そこに課題がある。それを、市場に認知してもらうっていうセットが必要になると思うんですけど、そういうことなんて含めた上で、利益よりも、プロダクトの成熟、サービスの成熟だっていうところにフォーカスを当てようとした場合、スタートアップに必要な、その価値に対するアクションとしてはどういうものがありますか？
Thank you. Earlier, you were just mentioning for startups going into the future, it's not the market so much as finding an answer to solutions. And therefore, you have to have awareness of that problem that you're trying to solve. Nonetheless, when you look at how you're going to get the funding from the VCs, they are going to ask and expect a certain amount of return. And for that to happen, they are going to most likely want to see growth in a market relevant to this whole picture. That means scaling. Scaling, again, renders a problem. Nonetheless, product maturity, service maturity, that trajectory is going to be much more of an arc that the VC is going to desire than profitability in its development of this business. Under all of that context, how can you suggest value be positioned for the startup?
Yeah, it is very interesting. I have not been in the situation of trying to convince VCs to fund something, so it's not a question I think about very much. It's just that now we are in a very different climate than we have been, and that's very important to notice. I think the interesting thing is to basically solve known problems in novel ways and be able to go and produce value along the way. I do want to reiterate that thing of having like a larger vision can help you orient yourself as you're basically finding value in the waypoints, the points that you basically get along the way. But I think there's no mistaking that this is a difficult environment, for these things. Yeah, I think that is pretty much what it is at this point. But, it's having vision, I think, is just an important thing with that. And it's not clear exactly whether that is the thing that will basically turn heads. But I do know that from what I've read about venture capital, the main thing they are looking for is people that will solve the problem, whatever problem comes in their way. And you're betting on people much more than a particular technology.
はい。ちょっと待ってください。非常に興味深い説明ですよね。ありがとうございます。私はベンチャーキャピタリストを説得する立場に特にいないし、いなかったので、こういうことについてご提示された内容について考えてこなかったというのが正直なところですけれども、今、我々が置かれている VC 環境は相当今までと違うということは十分認識するべきだとは思います。そして、すでに知られている課題を新規性を伴って解決するということが求められているのではないかと思っています。その結果、ビジョンというものを広く持つというのは、価値の獲得がしやすくなるということであり、 同時にビジョンがあるから道のりがある。その道のりに及んで途中で価値を拾っていける可能性が広がるということを言いたいと思います。よって私の言いたいことはビジョンを持つべきだということです。それによってじゃあ VC が振り向いてくれるかどうかは分かりません。ただビジネスを推進する上では、きっと得であると思ってます。
ありがとうございます。
すいません、最後です。そして問題解決という意味で言うと、VC は技術よりも人にお金を張ってます。これは間違いありません。
ありがとうございます。非常に今日。
あ
Thank you
り
very
がとうござい
much.
ます。Thank you.
Thank you very much for your invaluable comments.
最後、1点だけ私の川口の方から質問というか半分コメントみたいな話をさせていただければと思うんですけど、マイケルさん、今日は非常に広いそのビジョンとか、あと、チームの話もありましたね。組織のビジョンの話、チームの話あったと思います。で、一方で、みんなそうだと思うんですけど、最初のキャリアは、例えば一人のプログラマーとか、技術的なことを解決する人から始まっている人が、ここの会場も多いのかなと思います。で、会場には何人か若いプログラマーの人もいますので、そういう人たちに、これからどういうふうにビジョンとかチームと付き合っていったらいいかなっていうところを、マイケルさんからアドバイスを最後いただければと思います。お願いします。
This is Kawaguchi. I'd like to go ahead and wrap things up with commentary and a final question. Michael, you have provided your description of having a broad vision, and in your talk, you talked about organizational vision, working as a team. And no doubt it's all true. In the beginning, we were all just one single solitary programmer, or we were a tech solver. And as it turns out, we have young coders in the audience in that bracket. And so if you could just turn your final answer to those folks in the audience who might benefit from your final thoughts on how they could relate to your description of vision and how they could relate to the team currently and into the future with the new backdrop.
That's an interesting question. I think the main thing to go and do and positioning yourself for the future as a developer is just know that you are first and foremost a problem solver, right? And it really helps to basically be aware of the context in which you work so you can offer better solutions and maybe see solutions that other people might not necessarily see and present them. So I always say that in addition to the technical skills that we have and that we develop, we just need to be very curious and start to go and discover how things work in other industries, even far away from the current one we're in, because you always get this possibility that you'll see a solution in one place that you can apply in what you're doing. And it can be even something simple in the technical domain or something which basically helps the business move forward with things. Think of yourself as a problem solver, an understander and a problem solver, and be curious. I think that's the main advice.
良い質問ありがとうございます。今日会場にいらっしゃるデベロッパー開発者の皆さん、ぜひ問題解決係として今後臨んでほしいと思います。どういうことでしょうか。つまり仕事をしているときに抱えている状況においてどういう背景が存在するのか、よく調べて知る、学ぶことですね。そのことによってより良い問題解決手法を提案できると思います。多くの人が見えていない解決手法の提案も可能になる可能性があります。つまり技術的な能力を磨くのも一方で必要ながら、好奇心を持っていろんな違う業界の仕組みをどんどん学んでいけばと思うんですね。その他の業界でやっていることの応用が目の前にある自分の解決をしなければならない業界の問題に対してヒントになる可能性が非常に大きい可能性があります。もちろん技術的な単純な何か掴んできたものを提案して解決する場合もあります あるいはビジネスサイドをよりよく推進することができる可能性のあるものも見つけてくることができるかもしれません。ですから、ぜひ好奇心を持ってですね、問題解決をするんだという意識を持ってほしいと思います。
はい、ありがとうございました。もう一件質問した人がいたんですけど、ちょっと時間的にここまでにさせていただければと思います。Thank you for so many questions from the audience. Thank you so much. We would like to finish out this session. Thank you so much. Firstly, Michael-san, thank you so much. This is a great talk and a great answer. Yeah. We are very happy to hear that. Thank you so much. ありがとうございました。
Michael, thank you. It's a pleasure.
Can I add one thing?
Yeah, sure.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, sure.
Okay. So it's interesting. I'm known for the legacy code and technical debt stuff. We didn't talk about it too much here today. I'm going to be basically doing a seminar next week, free online, about technical debt things, in case you're interested. And I'll also be signing books, I think, over there at some point in time. But thank you for the faith that I could say something outside of technical debt, and I appreciate that. Thank you. And thank you for saying so.
最後になりますけども、レガシーコード、技術的負債についてあまり触れない話となってしまったんですけども、実は来週オンラインで無料のセミナーを技術的負債について話しますので、ぜひ参加してください。また、私の書いた本、サイン会をさせていただいておりますので、よろしくお願いします。